started.
Okay, got it.
Okay, can everyone see the source sheet now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Now
Good.
we can.
Now you
make
can,
it,
okay.
make it a little bigger.
I can make it bigger, yeah. Is that better?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this always gives me
Put it on the
problems.
Okay.
All right, so we are, Dad, it's interesting you're here. We're going to talk about tonight the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Em, honoring parents.
Like it.
Okay. I told my kids they should join. They weren't so interested. So we're this week in Parshat Yitro, which is the the narrative is quite striking. I think we spoke about this in previous years, that the Parsha, which has in it the revelation at Sinai, the Ten Commandments, begins and is named for Yitro, who's a Midianite priest, Moshe's father-in-law, but it's quite a striking contrast. And a lot of interesting things to say on that. But then, this is really the transition point. Up until now, the Chumash has been primarily, I guess we can call it history or narrative and stories. And not that that ends, but with the revelation at Sinai and the giving of the Ten Commandments, it becomes primarily focused on details of law. So this is, in many schools, we're discussing the Parsha gets a little bit more tricky because it's not as interesting and as captivating for the kids. But I think that there's plenty of interesting stuff to say. So I wanted to tonight, and this is actually, Robert was there, and if Arthur joins us, so we had a really interesting conversation this past Shabbos during the learning between Mincha and Marv, and we're going to touch on that towards the end of this year. But I wanted to begin by just looking, right, where we all know that the Ten Commandments appear in our Parsha, in Parshat Yitro, and then they're repeated in Devarim, right? Much of Devarim means a retelling. So there's a lot of things that are repeated in Devarim, including an account of the Aseret HaDibrot, of the Ten Commandments. And so just to begin, let's look at the two appearances of our mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of honoring parents. So in our Parsha, in Sefer Shmot, source number 1, we read, Kabed et avicha v'yatimecha, L'ma'an yarichun yamecha al ha'adama asher Hashem lokecha noten lach. Honor your father and your mother in order that you will have long days on the land which Hashem your God is giving to you. And in Devarim, it reads as follows: Kabed et avicha ve'etimecha kasher tzivcha Hashem elokecha, l'man yarichun yamecha, u'leman yitav lach al ha'adama asher Hashem elokecha noten lach. Honor your father and your mother as God has commanded you, in order that you will have long days, and in order that it shall be good for you on the land which Hashem your God is giving to you. So what are the significant differences in these two accounts of the mitzvah?
Second one has a precise mention of Hashem commanding one to do it.
Okay, kasher tzivcha Hashem lokecha, as God has commanded you. And we'll see, right on the surface, we might think that that is referring back to the first time we encounter this mitzvah in Sefer Shmot, but we'll see that's not the way that that the majority of the commentators understand it. So that's one good difference, is that we have a reference to a previous iteration or commandment or giving of this commandment.
Oh, let's see. But there is a third version of it in the Holiness Code.
Yeah.
Also.
So that's not, so there it's Isha Vivi Imo Tirau.
Right.
Right. So that's an interesting question, is honoring one's parents and fearing or revering one's parents the same mitzvah or two separate mitzvot? That's an interesting question.
There are two aspects here about whether there's a reward, or the
Okay,
nature of the reward for keeping the mitzvah of honoring father and mother. In that, in the first, it's a promise of the possibility of long surviving
right,
in the land, but it doesn't say whether that'll be a good life or a
Okay.
peaceful life or a
Okay.
productive life, but it'll be endurance. And the second, that you should do okay, you should do well,
okay, so the
which is a
second
more
adds
general
that
promise.
it will be not just a long life, but it will be a good life.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Anything else?
Second one emphasizes also at the very end that Hashem's giving you this land. It's assigned to you. It's the
Well,
highest-
that same phrase appears in both versions.
Ah, I see. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
it is. And
twice.
it's Alokacha both times. Just-
Okay, so good, so good. So there's these nuanced differences. And we'll keep these in mind as we work our way through the sources. I wanted to start by noting a really interesting thing. These are just two of several places where we see this phenomenon. Hey, Cheryl.
Hi.
The first is in Devarim Rabbah, and this is both as far as in the rabbinic literature, whom we learn this mitzvah from, or who teaches us how to properly perform this mitzvah. So I can't remember if we ever discussed, I think we have discussed this first paradigm of Kibud Av V'Aim in previous shiurim.
Yes.
But the Medrash tells us quite interestingly, source number 3, let me make sure the English is displayed on your screen. Rabban Shimon, Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Lo kibed beria et avotav kimo ani et avotai. Right, so he begins off by saying, no one has honored their parents as much as I do. Okay, so he's not a modest guy in this in this telling, right? I am the best at honoring parents. No one did it better than me. But matzati shekibed Esav le'aviv yoter mimeni. The only person that might have done a better job at it was Esav. What do we know about Esav? Good guy or bad guy?
Regard to his father, he was a good guy until he started deceiving him, I suppose. But
Okay.
He didn't deceive.
yeah, he had good moments there.
It's a bit of a trick question, right? Because we definitely, in the rabbinic tradition, in the Medrash and Gemara, he's definitely a bad guy. Definitely a bad guy. And that's clearly the implication here is that despite his being a bad guy, nonetheless, he excelled at this mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Aim. We've discussed that in the Torah, it's not so clear if he was really so bad, right? What did he do that was so bad in the pshat of the Torah? The only indication is that we see that he marries a Knani woman, and it says that this didn't sit well with his parents.
What was her name? Was it Yehudit?
No.
Hittite one.
I'm forgetting. I'm totally blanking.
If the name had been Yehudit, I could say he married a woman who sounded Jewish, at least.
Yeah, it wasn't Yehudit. And then his declaration that he wants to kill Yaakov also not so good. But the pshat in the Torah is he wasn't such a bad guy, at least until that point, when the Bechor, the bracha, was stolen from him. But nonetheless, we see that right. So Esav is portrayed as the epitome, or right, someone who really excelled at this mitzvah. And how did Esav excel at this mitzvah?
He did marry
Eitzad.
Yehudit. He
was
did marry
Yehudit?
Yehudit. I looked
It
it
was
up.
Yehudit.
Yeah,
Oh,
at the age of 40 to a Canaanite woman,
okay,
Yehudit, the daughter of Beri the Hittite.
okay.
That's what
And
it
it
says.
right there. So we just read on one more. It says, and it was not well. Didn't sit well with his parents, right?
I just asked Who did he?
Oh,
who
you
did he-
didn't look it up. Okay. Okay, so I apologize, Robert. You were correct. I was wrong. But anyway, so how did Esau fulfill this mitzvah?
He knew his father liked fresh caught game,
Mhm.
and he got it, and he would prepare it in exactly the way that his father liked every time. He was catering
Right.
literally to his father's needs, desires, wants, and the matter of wanting to kill Yaakov, at least part of his motivation might have been ladun l'chavskut, so to speak, for his benefit at least, is he was offended by the dishonor that Yaakov's trick brings on his father.
Oh, okay, that's a charitable read.
No, we have something like that here in Baltimore, unfortunately, with the family that has interests in the baseball team and such.
Uh-huh.
And the fact that they had been fighting. If they've made peace, it's more respectful for
Yeah.
the parents. And so it
Okay.
again, we have somebody who's got a negative reputation in some particular circles, and yet there were certain things that he cultivated.
Yeah.
Whether or not you accept that as being enough to make up for everything else is another matter.
Right. So, and interestingly, the other midrashim, which I know we have studied before, also say that Esav had a tremendous relationship with Avraham, with his grandfather. So that's another interesting piece to this. So just to quickly conclude this source, so he says that how did Esav do this mitzvah better than me? This is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel speaking. Is that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, when I would attend to my father, to my parents, I would do it, if we were in the house, I would do it in my house clothes. I wouldn't get dressed up special for the occasion, but Esav, every time he was doing anything for his father Yitzchak, would put on his best clothes. And then the Medrash continues, quite interesting, and it says that when Bnei Yisrael were coming to conquer the land, Hashem showed them where Esav's descendants were living and said, don't go to war against them. You won't win. Because the merit that Esav accrued for the great kavod he showed to his parents is still going to protect them. So this is like a really serious thing, right? Esav really excelled at it. And then the next source is also I think a fairly familiar, well-known story in the Gemara. The Gemara asks in Kiddushin, if I have to scroll down in the English, please let someone interrupt me and let me know. Ba'ami nemi Rav Ula ad heichan kibud avaim. So they asked Rav Ula, how far does one have to go to fulfill this mitzvah of honoring one's parents? Amar lahem tzur ma'asa noch v'yachad ve'ashkelon v'dama ben nitina shemo. He says, well, you can learn from one non-Jew who lived in Ashkelon, whose name was Dama ben Mitina. Right, one time the sages needed to buy something from his family for a really large amount of money. And the key to get, when other sources say it was one of the jewels for the breastplate for the Kohen Gadol, the key to get to the jewel was locked up under something that his father was sleeping on. Vilot Ciaro, and he did not wake up his father in order to get the key. Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Shalut Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so the same thing. And then the Gemara continues and it says, because he didn't bother his father to get the key, in this one instance, he was rewarded, and later on, one of his cows gave birth to a para aduma, to a red heifer. And so that's right, a very rare thing, and that also is needed by the rabbis in the Beis HaMikdash. So they came and they offered him a crazy amount of money, even more than they were going to pay for the original jewel. And he says to them, I know I could charge you any price I want. All I'm going to charge you is the money that I lost out on the first instance. Okay, so these are the two paradigms of Kibud Avaim that the the rabbis and the Medrash and the Gemara paint for us. Esav and this non-Jew named Dama ben Netina. Now, I've noted in previous occasions, Dama ben Netina is quite the tzaddik. That I don't know, if someone came to our house when we were growing up and said, "I'll give you $1 million if you get me whatever jewelry, whatever coin you have," and you were taking a nap, I think you probably would have punished me more if I didn't wake you up to get the key.
Absolutely.
So, so he's like he's an exceptional, like, you know, whether anyone can really learn from him is a interesting pedagogical question. But what's the point of this? Why do I bring this? Is to show that Kibud Avayim is presented to us as something that should be so obvious that we can learn from these figures that we otherwise would not have any business learning Torah from. Esav is the Rasha, is the most evil, wicked person we can think of in Sefer Breshit, right? He's the worst. And yet, Esav is the one who teaches us how to do Kibud Avayim. And the same is true, right? Dama ben Netina. Okay, he's a really not righteous guy, but we're told, the first thing we're told about him is he is a non-Jew. Non-Jews don't observe the Torah. So why are we learning this mitzvah from these two people? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
Is it accurate to say that we're learning the mitzvah from these two people, or rather they're cited as illustrations of a mitzvah which is commanded? The obedience is because of command.
Okay,
The
fine.
question about the non-Jew, he doesn't have, as far as I know, in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, a specific requirement to honor and fear his parents.
Right.
Oh, maybe
So-
maybe it's saying that it is universal, but this is a more universal commandment that applies beyond just the Jewish people.
Okay, beautiful. So that is certainly bolstered by source number 5, the Yerushalmi, which tells us, right, makes the famous connection between, we already noted that when it comes to Kibud Avayim, the Torah tells us that you'll have a long life, you're promised a long life if you fulfill it. There's one other mitzvah in the Torah that we're promised a long life if we fulfill it. What's that?
Saving a bird,
Shiluach
Or-
Hakan, sending away the mother bird before
Sending away the
taking
mother
eggs,
bird, right.
right? So the Gemara there says, right, sending away the mother bird is the easiest of all mitzvot to do, and honoring parents is the hardest of all mitzvot to do. It gets into discussion, but part of the discussion is it calls Kibud Avayim, there's the Priat Hachov. It's paying a debt. Right? So again, it seems to be this totally rational, logical mitzvah, according to this approach. It's something which is paying a debt. You don't need any proof. You don't need to be told that if you take on a debt, you have to pay that debt back. Right? We don't need, right? We can learn it from a non-Jew because it seems to be from Esav, because it seems to be the most logical, rational mitzvah that we have. Makes perfect sense. Anyone disagree with that?
It's almost like an extension of the commandment to set up courts of justice in a way, you know?
How so?
Well, because the amount of care that a parent gives and all of that is something that should be respected and you know, returned to them.
Okay. Okay. I hear that. So right, so that's an interesting question, whether we could categorize that requirement so that non-Jews do have a Torah-based obligation for it, based on that common sense application, or that, right, we want to use the analogy of repaying a debt. So okay, maybe we can say that it's legality extends
Mhm.
to all of humanity as well. That's an interesting application, perhaps.
Well, the word tzedakah really means a balance of that everything is right in the right balance. So perhaps it could be extended conceptually that way too, in support of what your father said.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay, so
I did just check the Rambam beforehand because I realized that we were going in this direction, and of course, and it isn't given even in the expansion and the commentary that I got here. So, but you know, I think this is good for a discussion that we see it.
okay, so there's a major question though. If we're saying based on what we've seen up until this point that Kibud Avayim is a totally logical mitzvah, we all understand the logic. We all understand why it should be that we have to honor our parents who brought us into the world, who support us, who raised us, who teach us, who provide for us. There's a major question that arises because which number of the 10 Commandments is it?
6 or 7. Let's see. Fifth number.
It's number 5.
5. Yeah. 5. Yeah.
So we have different ways that the 10 Commandments are divvied up, are categorized. Perhaps the most basic is 5 and 5. So one distinction between the first 5 and the second 5 is that the first 5
between
There's a-
us and Hashem, and then between us and man.
Okay, so the first 5 are generally seen as being Adam Lamakom, between us and Hashem. And the second 5 are bein Adam L'Chavero. Now, based on what we've seen on Kibud Avayim, would you place that as bein Adam Lamakom or bein Adam L'Chavero?
There.
Yeah, it seems to be, right? If it's based on pure logic, and we're learning it from Asa, from the non-Jew, from the analogy of repaying a debt, clearly it's talking about our responsibility towards a fellow human, right? In this case, our parents, right? Not just any random human, but it seems to be very much on a ben Adam L'Chavero side. So what's it doing in its position as number 5?
We talk about Avinu Shabashamayim, and so Ribbono Shel Olam, God is in effect taking sides by implication. He is the father of all creation. He is the one that we thank for the fact that we can wake up, that we can do what we do, that the food is there, can be grown, that the water rains and the rivers run, and all of this, so that there's an obligation to recognize the goodness that we've had and we've gotten from creation on, so that there's a connection, that it's a professional courtesy, so to speak.
Okay, so but what you just said, we'll come back to it. I don't want to shut it down, but first I will try to shut it down. What you just said is, okay, so we should thank Hashem, right? Parents
Hashem takes the thank partly directly and partly vicariously. Those who treat the poor properly are doing what is expected, so that it's a reflection of greatness by doing what God would want. God does want. So we're imitating God. The idea of imitatio Dei that the non-Jews will use as best we can, and there's an approximation. It's a strange equivalence.
So if it's number 5, and it's on the side with the commandments between us and God, then it's considered a commandment between us and God to honor our father and mother.
Yeah.
It's not between us and other man. So our father and mother are not considered like other people.
Okay, so that's interesting.
With.
I mean, we're wading into potentially theologically troubling waters here, right? if we're trying to equate, but so okay, maybe part of it is don't see your parents as any other people, right? There's a whole big debate in, I don't know, education and in parenting books, right? Should your kids see you as their friend or as something other than their friend? And maybe it's really problematic for kids to see their parents as their friend, as their peer, right? They shouldn't feel that they can joke around and treat you in the same way that they would their friend. A lot to say about that, but so maybe the point is that don't see your parents as other people, but you should see them as something slightly different or elevated without necessarily going the full step of saying see your parents as God.
Mhm.
Very good.
The Ramban, it's a little bit complicated, so I'll just summarize, but he points to the idea that we see in the Gemara that tells us there's Gimel Shutfim B'Adam, that each person really has three partners in their existence, in their creation: Father, Mother, and God. And so that their parents are really partners with God in bringing the children into the world and in raising the children. And so again, not it gets a little dicey as about how literal and how far you take it, but there is certainly some partnership elements in the parent-child relationship that fits very well with with our relationship to Hashem.
The Rebbe's take on it is that, in a sense, it's a bridge commandment because it goes right from one into the next set, so it is kind of both in a way. Just as the one about murder is, I was just thinking, is a bridge, because a person who murders someone else is advocating the place of God and taking somebody else's life. Perhaps we could think of it that way too. But the other thing he brings up is that it's a share in Hashem's infinity. To go ahead and have children is like witnessing to the infinity of Hashem. That was another of approaching it. Yeah.
All right. So the Maharal takes it begins by taking it in the way that we've just explained. The Maharal says, why does Kibud Avaim come as the fifth commandment after the mitzvah of Shabbos? Shabbos is number 4. She's here, Shanida ki hu yitbarech poel hakol v'hu ha'ela klalit, right? So Shabbos teaches us that God is in control of the entire world, right? Both nature and history. And that is the general principle. He's here lechavod ha'avot. And after it tells us this general principle about God's great power and God's great strength, it tells us to honor our parents. Shehem ala pratit le'alul zeh biprat. Because honoring one's parents is a way how did I translate it here? Which is a specific application of the general principle. Honoring your parents is a way of recognizing God's ultimate control, right? So your parents aren't in the level of God, but they, as Robert was saying, and I wanted to flesh it out a little bit more before saying it out loud explicitly, that they are kind of the representatives of God in this world. And so the way that we treat our parents is reflective of our relationship with Hashem, or it should be, is perhaps what the Maharal is saying here. That if we truly love God and we truly appreciate all that God does for us, then we will, by necessity, recognize and appreciate all that our parents have done for us. And so it becomes kind of a microcosm of the much broader relationship that we're supposed to have. And then the Maharal continues, this is written with the first 5 commandments, right, on the Ben Adam Lamakum side of things, because it really does relate to God. And if you honor God's partner in bringing you into the world and sustaining you and providing for you, then it is a way of honoring and showing respect to God as well. And therefore it is appropriate that it is on the Bein Adam Lamakom side of things. And the Maharal continues, and he references back to the Gemara we saw of Dama ben Netina. And he says, Bior inyan zeh, hachachamim elu ba'u leba'er ad kama hasecha mechayev mitzvah zot, right? The Gemara, the rabbis wanted to teach us how far and to what extent we have to go to fulfill this mitzvah. Ki mitzvah zot bifrat mechayev ota hadat v'aseichel, because this mitzvah comes to the logical conclusion that a person should honor his parents who brought him into the world. And that's why we specifically learn it from a non-Jew. A non-Jew doesn't fulfill a mitzvah because they were commanded. Right? A big question in any mitzvah, which has a logical explanation, is, do we do that mitzvah? Do we teach our kids to do that mitzvah because it's the right thing to do? Right? Don't hit someone because you don't want someone to hit you back because we care about people. Or do we say, don't hit someone because that's what God commanded you? Right? Everyone agrees that ultimately our kavana should be, we're doing this because it's a mitzvah that God gave us. But when it comes to a non-Jew, they don't have that requirement. A non-Jew will only do something that makes good logical sense. And so we learn it specifically from a non-Jew to show us how logical it has to be. Okay, so he said it goes on with the story. The rabbis wanted to buy a jewel from him, and they were going to pay a lot of money. And he just says that these numbers in the story are exaggerations, are just showing it was really expensive. And then he continues in the next paragraph. What was the reward that Dama ben Netina was given?
Red heifer.
The para aduma. What's the para aduma when we think about mitzvot?
Chukat HaTorah.
Zot chukat haTorah. It is the ultimate chok, the ultimate illogical, irrational, no good explanation for this, right? You take a cow, you shecht it, you burn it. With its ashes, you sprinkle it over someone who became ritually impure, and that's how they become pure. There is no good rational explanation for the para aduma. It's the ultimate irrational mitzvah. And so the Maharal connects the two. He says, Dama ben Netina, who was the embodiment of the ultimate rational, logical mitzvah of honoring his parents, is rewarded with the ultimate irrational mitzvah. Why? Why should that be the proper reward for Dama ben Netina?
It's implying that he fulfilled the one for his father with also this notion of a koch somehow.
So that's a nice take. That would be if we were briskers, and that would be the answer we would be giving. That he was right, despite the fact that he was doing it out of a sense of obligation, not out of a sense of this is the right thing to do. That could be a very beautiful Dvar Torah from the Netziv, or from Reb Chaim Brisk, or from the Beis Halevi. That's a really interesting thought. That's not what the Maharal says.
No, it's not. I know. It's right in front of me here, but I couldn't resist. Sorry.
Okay, so the answer the Maharal gives is that this demonstrates, and maybe it's not so far off what you were saying, Anne. This demonstrates the ultimate truth and unity of Torah, right? Is that we have to have these two opposite extremes come together, right? Proper Torah observance is to be able to follow the ultimate, right, the most logical mitzvah and the most illogical mitzvah, and to recognize that they both come together as being direct commandments from Hashem. Right? Heim mechuyavim ze mizeh. The logical honoring parents is necessarily connected and related to the ultimate chok, to the illogical mitzvah of para aduma. And then Rav Amital, the former Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshivat Har Etzion, drives this point home by adding one more detail to it. So Anne had noted that in Sefer Devarim, when we have the mitzvah of Kibud Avaim, the Torah tells us honor your father and mother as God had commanded you. So what does it mean as God has commanded you, or as God had commanded you?
It had happened once before, as you said.
It happened once before. Where did it happen once before?
At
So,
Mar, yeah.
According to Rashi, according to the Gemara, it happened in last week's Parsha.
Yeah.
In last week's Parsha, after the splitting of the sea, we have right, what immediately happens after this, after the Shirat Hayam, after the song at the sea? We complain. There's no food, there's no water. And so God gives us food and water, and then he gives us, as the Torah says, right, they had water, it was bitter. So in source number 8, Hashem instructs Moshe, and Moshe throws his staff into the water, and the water becomes sweetened. Sham sam lo chok umishpat v'sham nisahu. There is where God gave him chok umishpat, these two types of laws, chok, the irrational, illogical, and mishpat, the logical, v'sham nisahu, that is where God tested them. So Rashi tells us on the spot that what did God give Moshe at that point? B'mara natan lahem miksat parshiot shel Torah shitasku bahem. In Mara, we were given a small subset of mitzvot that we had to observe. Shabbos, Para Aduma, Vidinim. And those mitzvot were Shabbos, the mitzvah of Para Aduma, and the mitzvah of Dinim, of setting up courts. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, source number 10, tells us that it includes in the count Kibud Avaim, honoring your parents. So we were given, before we came to Har Sinai, as kind of an introduction to what this life is we're about to get ourselves into, we're given a small subset of mitzvot to observe. And those mitzvot are Shabbos, Kibud Avaim, honoring parents, Dinim, setting up courts, and Para Aduma. Chok umishpat, we have some of the most logical mitzvot and some of the most illogical, irrational mitzvot. If Amital says, source number 11, through the combination of the two, one reaches the complete existence of Judaism. Rashi demonstrates this by citing Chazal's statement that in Mara, the Jews receive Shabbos, Para Aduma, and laws of justice, an example of a logical mitzvah as it is an integral part of society. Okay, so we can't have one without the other, is the point. Is that we can't have just the mishpat, just the logical, without also having the chok, without also having the illogical, the unexplainable. And then Rav Amital takes it one step further. Because how is what's the parsha that we're going to read this Shabbos?
Yitro.
Parshat Yitro. Who's Yitro?
Moshe's father?
Yeah, Moshe's father-in-law.
Father-in-law.
Right. And what happens at the beginning of the parsha?
Moshe gives very great respect to Yitro when he comes, and the
Okay.
Or HaChaim is beautiful on that. He says this is a way of saying that one is to treat one's father-in-law as if he were one's father.
Okay, so Moshe certainly treats him with respect.
Is he the one that tells Moshe he needs to have like people working underneath of him so that all
Yes.
the problems are not like delegating?
So Yitro comes, right? What prompted him to come is a really interesting conversation as well. But he comes and he sees, after he's greeted, he sees what Moshe's day is like. And Moshe's day is from morning till evening. He's sitting and he's just bombarded by people coming, asking him various questions. And Yitro says, this is not sustainable. You won't be able to do this, Moshe. You need to set up a system so that not every question has to come directly to you. And at first, Moshe resists a little bit. The Ramban explains to us quite beautifully that Moshe is hesitant to accept Yitro, or feels that he has to be the one to handle and entertain everyone's questions, says that there's 3 reasons why people were coming to Moshe. You can look at the Ramban on your own. He says there's 3 reasons why people come to Moshe. Reason number 1 is they're coming to ask him for, for healing, for parnasa, right? Well, the way that people go to rabbis to ask for blessings, people would go to Moshe. Number 2 is they would go to Moshe if they had a judicial matter, a legal question. And the last one, so for different legal matters, they come to Moshe as well. And Rav Amital says in source number 13 is that Moshe felt he had to be the one to handle all of these matters, to handle the Rebbe role, to handle the court system, right, the civil matters, and to handle the religious matters, because it was so crucial for Moshe to impress upon the people that all of these 3 different disciplines are one and the same, right? All of these things are all part of Torah, are all under the general umbrella of Torah. And he was afraid that if he were to divvy it out and say, okay, we can have different judges who can handle the civil litigation, but if there's a ritual question, that of course has to come to me. Maybe that will go to the Kohanim, or that will go to one court system, right? That the people will see the Torah as being 3 different disciplines, 3 separate things. And it was so important for Moshe to teach the people that it's all one and the same. All these issues, these various reasons why they're coming to him, are all part of Torah, all part of connecting to Hashem. And therefore Moshe was hesitant to accept Yitro's suggestion, because Moshe wanted to ensure that this message wouldn't be lost to the people.
But the people were coming to him because they saw in him a figure who could grant them favor or favors, who could give them authoritative answers to important questions of halacha, how they're supposed to act and live. And rather than going to an intermediary, you go direct to the source. The danger that Moshe was in effect promoting is that people will see him as a special source, him as Sheni Lamalchus, so to speak, that they have access to, because Ribbono Shel Olam, Bashamayim, and so on, who can go there? They were terrified at Sinai. They asked him, they begged him, Moshe, you go yourself, you tell us about it later. Yeah. And the fact that none of Moshe's descendants is known now, that there's no line of the direct descendants from Moshe Rabbeinu, possibly could be a hint about the danger that was avoided because of the particular circumstances that Moshe's life ends up being played out in. That's
very interesting, and I certainly agree, and we've spoken on many occasions about the danger of gadol worship, the dangers of thinking that only the expert, the tzaddik, the rabbi has all the answers. I totally agree, right? But that's not exactly the point Rav Amital is making, right? So let's look at what Rav Amital says in number 13. Moshe wanted to keep these roles united, to emphasize the idea that interpersonal justice and moral action come from the same source as divine command and religious observance. He wanted to make it perfectly clear that to be a complete Jew, one is required not only to follow ritual law, but also to act properly towards one's fellow man. Okay, so that's why Moshe didn't set up Yitro's system from the get-go, but eventually was able to come around, and I guess to do it in a way that he felt that people wouldn't fall into this potential trap. Robert,
there's
I
another-
agree. Your concern is a very legitimate concern, but that's not the focus in this set of sources we're looking at. But thank you for that. And
There's
just to, I
there's
promise
another
that,
point, though.
go, sorry, Ann?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. There's another whole point, though. At this point, Moshe thought he was going to lead the people into the land. And so he didn't set the system up because he wanted to convey to them his experience of receiving Hashem. He wanted to give them, as the Rebbe calls it, divine consciousness. He wanted to give them the kind of consciousness he had of Hashem. And he was the one who was able to transmit it. So that, I think that's a slightly different category than these other things that we.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question about what did he envision would be after him. Meaning, even if he were to
Yeah.
lead them into the land, what did he envision would be? What did he envision there'd be another Moshe with the same level of communication with Hashem?
Yes, he expected them to be able to reach it when they got to the land.
Oh, okay.
And he wanted to prepare them for it.
Okay, interesting. So just a final source. As I mentioned, we had a really interesting conversation Shabbos afternoon. We've been learning Avot Rabbi Natan, which is kind of a midrashic take, expansion of the Mishnayot and Pirkei Avot. So we're up to the Mishnah, which says, "Aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver." Make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend. And there was a really interesting way that it explains the line, make for yourself a teacher. It says in this Avot Rabbi Natan, it means that a person should make for themselves one established teacher from whom they learn Torah, Mishnah, Halacha, Agada, all the different branches of Torah should all be learned from the same teacher. Why? Tam sheniach lo b'mikra, sof sheyamar lo b'mishnah. Tam sheniach lo b'medrash, sof sheyamar lo b'halachot. Because the explanations that the teacher gives you in learning the more basic elements of Torah, of learning straight up Chumash, will carry over to your study of Halacha and your study of Agad and your study of Gemara. That the same reason, the same approach will carry through in your deeper, more advanced study. And then Rabbi Meir gives an analogy. Halome torme rav echad lemahu domeh leechad shayalo sadeh achat v'zara miktzata chitim miktzata seorim. It's analogous, if you have one teacher, it's analogous to a person who has one field, one plot of land, in which you plant many different crops. You plant wheat and barley and fruits and olives, all in the same field. And if you do that, according to this, imsah adam hahu malei tova ubracha, then you'll be full of good and blessing. Bizman shalomed me shtaim shlosha, but if you learn from a few different teachers, domel misha yeshlo sadot harbe achat zarachitin achat zarasorim. It's as if you have many different fields, and each field has one dedicated crop. And it will happen that you'll be spread out. You'll have to go running all over the land in order to gather in your various crops, in order to tend to them. And so you won't have that same sense of good and blessing that you would if you had a more confined harvest zone, I guess we could call it. But the really interesting question, which we've all, I'm sure, experienced at various points in our life, is it best to have one teacher that you really learn from and really embody not only their knowledge, appreciate and gain their knowledge, but appreciate and come to develop an approach and a way of studying that embodies this teacher? Or is it more beneficial to have different teachers and different perspectives? You may not get the same in-depth dedication and sort of tunnel vision that you would have from studying under one person intensely, but to gain different perspectives. So that was the conversation we had on Shabbos afternoon, and it occurred to me that maybe this is, what we've been saying about Moshe here, and ultimately what we're saying about Kibud Avaim and how it connects the Bein Adam Lamakom, the Bein Adam Lechavero, the rational, the irrational mitzvot, might be part of that same conversation, right? That we need to have that unifying force. Now, again, different students, different people react and have different responses to whether it's better to have a multiple perspectives or one perspective. I don't want to get into the pedagogical discussion, but that ultimately to be able to see the unifying principles behind what might be disparate and separate disciplines is quite important and quite significant. And that might be part of what we've uncovered in our exploration tonight of Kibud Avaim. So
That's how the healing happens, as it says back in the other parsha. If you
Uh-huh.
listen to my voice and you have both the chok and the mitzvah, then there will be healing.
okay.
And certainly what
beautiful.
we all need in
Yeah.
our communities too. So thank you, Rabbi Kaplowitz, for your.
All right. I know the State of the Union is starting in about 8 minutes according to my computer, so I don't want to hold anyone up any longer, but I enjoyed this class tonight. Next week, looking forward, I will be broadcasting hopefully from Cleveland. I have another work trip scheduled, but my
Oh my.
flights should allow for me to be settled in the hotel and able to do the shiur from Cleveland. So I'm looking forward to speaking with everyone next week and seeing you in Shul, please God, on Shabbos, where we will read the Aseret Dibrot, read the 10 Commandments, and the Rambam tells us that it's every time we read it from the Torah, it's a reenactment. So it's a especially good week to be in Shul if you're able to make it. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Oh,
Very